Lakshmi Pichai never expected to be noticed. She had always lived in the quiet corners of life, choosing to stay behind the scenes while others stood on stage. Her hands, though wrinkled with time, had carried generations forward, but her name was rarely called, her story never told. She did not mind. She believed in doing good quietly. The morning of the event was warm and bright. The National Auditorium in Delhi was packed. Flags waved gently in the wind, cameras flashed, and people in suits whispered into microphones. It was a special gathering, one of the biggest of the year, an honor ceremony for innovators, educators, and social leaders. The Prime Minister himself was expected to attend. Lakshmi sat in the third row from the back, wearing a simple cotton sari with a faded border. Her hair was neatly tied back, her posture straight, and her expression calm. No one looked at her twice. Most people assumed she was a guest of someone more important. Next to her sat her son Sundar Pichai. He had been invited as a speaker for his work in technology. Everyone knew him. People came up for handshakes and photos, but Lakshmi quietly kept her hands folded on her lap, smiling politely when introduced, then looking away when the attention turned elsewhere. The program began with music and speeches. Dignitaries spoke of progress and pride, of vision and sacrifice. Sundar stood on stage and spoke from the heart. He spoke of dreams, of India, and of his mother. He did not name her directly, but his eyes scanned the crowd and paused for a moment in the direction of that quiet woman in the back row. Lakshmi lowered her eyes. Then came the moment everyone waited for, the announcement of a special recognition award. Prime Minister Narendra Modi walked up to the podium. The crowd rose, cameras clicked, and people leaned forward. But before reading the name on the card handed to him, Modi paused. He looked across the hall, his eyes sweeping slowly, not at the front row of guests or the decorated VIPs, but toward the quiet corners. Then he spoke. Today, we honor many bright minds, but there is one story here that we have never told. A story that teaches us the power of humility, of silent strength, and of kindness that never asks for attention. The room grew still. Before we go forward, I would like to ask a special guest to join me here. She did not come for awards. She came as a mother, as a teacher, and as a symbol of grace. Lakshmi Pichai, will you come to the stage? There was silence, then gasps. Sundar turned, surprised. Lakshmi's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, she froze. People turned to look. She shook her head softly, as if to say, "Not me." Modi smiled gently and said, "Yes, you." Her son reached for her hand. She hesitated. The applause began, soft at first, then louder. Lakshmi stood slowly. Each step she took toward the stage felt like walking through memory itself. Her father's small shop in Madurai, her college days, when few women dared to speak. The times she fed neighbors before feeding herself. The long nights helping Sundar study. The quiet prayers whispered into her worn pillow. She had never wanted attention. But now, the spotlight found her dot when she reached the stage. The Prime Minister folded his hands in respect. The entire hall stood up, and Lakshmi, who had spent her life standing behind others, was now standing where the light was brightest. Modi handed her the microphone. She looked at it for a moment, unsure. Then she spoke softly. I have nothing to teach the world, only one thing. Never stop being kind. The hall remained silent, and then, the loudest applause of the day. But deep inside, Lakshmi only thought of home, of the kitchen she cleaned that morning, of the jasmine flowers she left on her mother's photo, of the clay lamp still burning beside it. She looked at her son, tears filled his eyes, and then she smiled, calm, grounded, and full of grace. This was not her moment. It was every quiet person's moment, every parent's, every teacher's, every soul who believed that doing the right thing quietly still mattered. And as the crowd clapped and the stage lights glowed, Lakshmi Pichai stood, still, her story only just beginning. Lakshmi Pichai returned to her seat slowly, her heart still beating faster than usual. The lights of the stage had faded behind her, but something within her had been lit, something she hadn't felt in years. The applause still echoed in her ears as she sat down again next to Sundar. His hand gently touched hers, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. People around her looked at her differently now. Some nodded, some smiled. Others looked at her with wonder. Lakshmi gave a polite smile back, but inside, she was still somewhere far away back in Madurai, where it had all begun. After the event ended, there were many who came to speak to her. Reporters asked questions. Guests wanted photos. Organizers wanted quotes. But Lakshmi, tired and thoughtful, smiled kindly and answered softly. She gave short replies and thanked them with folded hands as she and Sundar walked back to their car. He looked at her and asked gently, "Amma, how are you feeling?" She replied, "I am still trying to believe it happened." On the ride home, silence filled the car, but it wasn't the heavy silence of awkwardness. It was a silence that came when memories rise to the surface, like old letters taken out of a drawer after many years. The next day, a picture of Lakshmi and the Prime Minister was on the front page of several newspapers. The internet was filled with messages praising her humility and quiet strength. Videos of her short speech were going viral. People all over the country were saying her words out loud, "Never stop being kind." But none of this changed her routine. She still woke up at 5. She still boiled tea leaves in the old steel pot. She still swept the veranda with the same coconut broom. And she still said her prayers before lighting the small lamp beside her mother's photo. Lakshmi did not feel like a celebrity. She still felt like a mother. And deep inside, she knew people didn't really know her story. They saw a moment, but they hadn't seen the years behind it. Those years were not easy. Lakshmi had grown up in a time when girls were expected to stay quiet, to follow rules, to stay in the background. Her father owned a small general store in Madurai. He was kind, but firm. He believed in education, but only up to a point. Her mother, soft-spoken and hard-working, often said, "Be strong like water, Lakshmi. It flows, but it shapes mountains." Lakshmi had dreams of becoming a teacher, but money was tight, and dreams were expensive. She worked part-time jobs, walked miles to college, and often studied by candlelight. Many laughed at her efforts, saying no one would hire a girl like her. But she kept going. When she married, she moved to Chennai with her husband. They had little, just a small rented room with a broken fan and thin mattresses on the floor. Her husband worked long hours, and Lakshmi taught neighborhood children in the evenings for a few rupees. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't stop herself from teaching. Then Sundar was born. Even as a baby, he was curious. He would stare at the ceiling fan like he was studying how it worked. He would take apart toys and try to put them back together. Lakshmi saw something in him, something special. She did everything to protect that spark. They didn't have money for fancy coaching or private school, but she made sure Sundar had books, a quiet place to study, and warm food to eat. When he fell asleep at his books, she would cover him with a blanket and gently turn off the light. She never pushed him. She simply stood behind him, ready to catch him if he fell. When Sundar went abroad for studies, Lakshmi didn't cry at the airport. But the moment he walked into the terminal, she whispered a small prayer and touched the ground. And when people later praised her son, she always said, "He made his own path. I only cleaned the dust from it." Now, as she sat on the terrace that evening with a small steel tumbler of filter coffee in her hands, she looked up at the orange sky. Birds were flying home. The wind carried the smell of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. She closed her eyes. She was not thinking about awards or news headlines. She was thinking about all the women like her, the ones who never got applause, the ones who gave everything but remained in the background, the teachers, the mothers, the nurses, the cleaners, the silent ones, and for the first time in her life, Lakshmi Pichai decided she would tell her full story, not for fame, not for attention, but so that someone, somewhere, would believe that their quiet work mattered too. Later that night, she took out an old notebook from a wooden trunk. Its pages were yellow, and the cover was cracked. It was the notebook she once used as a young woman to write her thoughts and dreams. Now, with hands older and slower, she began writing again. Page 1 said only this. The notebook sat open on her lap as Lakshmi Pichai sat near the old wooden window, where the morning sunlight crept in quietly, just like her thoughts. Her pen moved slowly, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted to say it right. Every word came from her heart, and her hand paused often, not for the next sentence, but to feel what she was writing. The past few days had changed something, not just outside, where news channels still played her speech and quoted her simple words, but inside her home too. Neighbors started stopping by to ask for advice. Young girls came holding schoolbooks. Local teachers invited her to speak at their schools. For someone who never liked crowds, it felt overwhelming. But Lakshmi stayed calm. She always believed that when something good comes suddenly, you must stay steady, or the waves will carry you away. One afternoon, as she sipped tea on the veranda, Sundar sat beside her with a puzzled look. He was holding his tablet, reading comments on social media. "Amma," he said, "people are calling you India's silent mother. Some are even saying you should write a book." Lakshmi looked at him with a soft smile. "A book is too big, Kanna. I'm just writing truths." "But people want to hear your truths," he replied. "They say your story gave them courage." Lakshmi looked away and said, "Then maybe I must write for them." That evening, she walked to a nearby school, where she had been invited to speak. It was a simple building with peeling paint and dusty floors, but the children's eyes sparkled with dreams. Lakshmi stood before them with folded hands, wearing the same cotton sari she always wore. She didn't read from paper. She just spoke. "When I was your age," she said, "I was told that being quiet was enough. But being quiet is not the same as being small. You can be quiet and still make a big difference." The children listened in silence. "Your books are your tools, your words are your light. Use them with care and strength." After she finished, one girl stood up and asked, "Auntie, did you ever feel like giving up?" Lakshmi paused. The question touched a deep memory. There was a time when Sundar was in college, and they had no money to pay for his bus fare. She had sold her gold chain quietly, without telling anyone. There were times when neighbors mocked her for dreaming too big for her son, and there were nights she cried alone in the kitchen so no one would hear. "Yes," she said, her voice low. "Many times, but I didn't, because I had a reason to go on. Find your reason, and don't let it go." After her speech, the headmaster came up with tears in his eyes. "You reminded me of my own mother," he said. Lakshmi didn't know what to say. She just nodded, folded her hands, and left quietly. When she reached home, there was a letter waiting for her. The envelope had the official government seal. She opened it slowly, her hands steady, but her heart unsure. It was an invitation Prime Minister Modi had personally invited her to a national roundtable for women leaders, thinkers, and educators. It was going to be a televised discussion on women's role in shaping India's future. Lakshmi stared at the letter for a long time. "Why me?" she whispered, but deep down she knew the answer. Because she spoke for those who couldn't. The day of the event came quickly. Lakshmi wore her mother's old silk sari, carefully ironed. She pinned a jasmine flower in her hair, not for the cameras, but because it reminded her of her roots. At the round table, she sat among judges, doctors, activists, and ministers. Each of them had done great things, and Lakshmi, who had never asked for the spotlight, now found herself at the center of one. When it was her turn to speak, she held the mic gently and said, "I am not here because I am the most educated or the most powerful. I am here because I represent the quiet strength that lives in every home, every village, every school. I am the voice of the woman who wakes up before dawn, works without rest, and asks for nothing in return." A hush fell over the room. "You want to build a better India?" she asked. "Start by listening to the silent ones. They are already holding it up." When she finished, the applause was long and deep, but Lakshmi didn't smile for the attention. She smiled because, maybe now, finally, the world had started listening. Not just to her voice, but to the voices like hers that had been ignored for too long after the event. A journalist ran up and asked, "Ma'am, what's your message for the young girls watching this today?" Lakshmi thought for a moment. "Don't wait for the world to see you. First, see yourself. That is where it all begins." And that night, back in her small room, with her old notebook beside her and the jasmine still in her hair, Lakshmi added just one sentence to her story. "I was once invisible. Now I am seen not for fame, but for what I have always been." Lakshmi Pichai had never walked through a parliament gate before. The iron doors were tall, the guards stood straight, and the marble floors echoed every step. But she walked slowly, with calm feet and a still heart. She was not here to impress anyone. She was here to listen, to speak only when needed, and to carry with her the voices of those who never got the chance. The week after the televised roundtable had brought waves of unexpected change. Calls came from colleges, women's groups, and youth forums. Letters came from young girls in remote villages who wrote about their dreams, their fears, and how Lakshmi's words gave them courage. A school teacher from Jammu mailed her a handmade card with a note. "You reminded us that silence is not weakness, it is often the loudest form of strength." But Lakshmi stayed grounded. She still made filter coffee every morning. She still washed her clothes by hand, and she still folded her sari neatly before bed. Even as her image appeared on television and posters, even as newspapers started calling her the heart of India's women movement, she never let pride settle in her chest. One afternoon, a group of young women visited her home. They sat cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed and full of questions. "How did you stay strong when no one supported your dreams?" one asked. Lakshmi gave a gentle smile and said, "I did not need many people to believe in me. I just needed one, and that person was me." Another girl asked, "Didn't you ever get angry at the world for ignoring you?" Lakshmi paused before answering. "Anger is fire. If you hold it too long, it burns you instead of lighting the way. I chose peace because it gave me the strength to move forward." The girls wrote down her words like poetry. They asked her to write a book. Lakshmi laughed softly. "If I write one, will you promise to write yours too?" They all nodded. That night, Sundar told her something surprising. "Amma, a publisher from Delhi wants to help you write your story. They say your words can change lives." Lakshmi looked at the notebook beside her. Its pages were now half full. Each sentence was written in simple language, each one telling a small truth. "I am not a writer," she said. "But you are," Sundar replied. "Every life you've touched is a chapter." Lakshmi agreed, on one condition, that all the earnings from the book would go to building libraries in small towns and villages, places where books were rare, and dreams even rarer. The publisher agreed. Soon, the news spread that Lakshmi Pichai's book would be titled Quiet Hands, Strong Heart. The title came from something her mother once told her. A woman's hands may look gentle, but inside them lies the strength of generations. The book's release was planned for a special ceremony in Delhi, where women leaders from across India would attend. But before the launch, something unexpected happened. Lakshmi received another invitation, this time to visit her old college in Madurai. They wanted to honor her and named the new study hall after her. Tears filled her eyes as she read the letter. The same college where she once sat on cracked benches, where she studied under dim lights, now wanted to remember her forever. She traveled to Madurai quietly, not telling many people. When she reached the college gate, an old watchman recognized her and said, "You haven't changed. Only the world sees you now." Lakshmi smiled. The ceremony was simple. The principal gave a short speech. Students clapped. A curtain was pulled to reveal a board. Lakshmi Pichai Study Hall for those who believe in silent courage. Lakshmi stood up to speak. Her voice was soft but clear. I walked these paths when no one noticed. I studied in corners while others laughed. But I believed that even if the world forgets you, knowledge remembers you. And knowledge will carry you further than applause ever can. The students clapped, some with tears. After the event, a young janitor approached her. She looked nervous, her hands shaking slightly. "Ma'am," she said, "I don't go to college here. I clean the halls. But I watch the classes sometimes, when no one is looking. I just wanted to say, thank you. Your story makes me want to study again." Lakshmi held the girl's hand and said, "Then promise me this study not to be famous, but to be free." The girl nodded, eyes wet with hope. On her way back to Chennai, Lakshmi looked out of the train window. Fields passed by, children waved at the train, and temples stood tall in the distance. She thought about how far she had come, but more than that, she thought about how far so many others could still go, if only someone lit a lamp for them. By the time she reached home, her notebook had 2 new lines. When one woman finds her voice, she becomes an echo for thousands more. I never asked for the spotlight, but now that I stand in it, I want to turn it toward others. Lakshmi Pichai stood backstage, holding her old cotton handkerchief gently in her hands. Ahead of her, the hall buzzed with quiet energy. It was the evening of her book launch, and the auditorium in Delhi was filled with people from all walks of life, leaders, writers, young students, mothers, and even street vendors who had read about her story and somehow made their way there. The air felt heavy, not with noise, but with hope. Her sari was simple cream with a thin gold border, the same one she wore to her son's college graduation years ago. The jasmine in her hair was fresh, and in her heart there was no pride, only peace. The host walked up to the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the author of Quiet Hands, Strong Heart, the woman who reminded us that greatness does not shout, it whispers, Lakshmi Pichai." As she stepped onto the stage, the lights were warm, not blinding. The crowd stood and clapped, but Lakshmi did not raise her hand. She simply folded them and bowed. "Thank you," she said softly into the mic. "But tonight is not about me. It is about every woman who made tea before sunrise. Every father who sold his shoes so his daughter could buy books. Every child who studied in a room with no fan. And every dream that waited patiently until someone believed in it." The applause was quiet, respectful then, as she turned a page in her speech notes. She paused. Her eyes met someone in the front row, a young boy, maybe 12 years old, sitting beside his mother. His shirt was too large, his hair slightly uncombed, and his hands clutched a worn notebook. But his eyes, those eyes were full of questions. Lakshmi smiled at him. "What is your name, child?" The boy stood up shyly. "Rahul, ma'am, Rahul," she said. "Do you want to speak someday too?" He nodded. "Then start by listening, because those who listen deeply speak truthfully." The room went silent again, holding that moment like a breath no one wanted to release. After her speech, the first copy of the book was presented to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had attended without a public announcement. He stood beside her and said, "In all my years of service, I have met many powerful voices. But Lakshmi's voice is different. It is the power of silence, of patience, of goodness." Lakshmi turned to him and replied, "Sir, thank you. But I did not come this far alone. I came on the shoulders of many who never got to stand here. Tonight, I stand for them." Later that evening, as the crowd mingled and books were signed, Lakshmi noticed a quiet woman standing near the back dressed in a simple kurta, holding a book but making no effort to come forward. Lakshmi walked toward her. "Did you get your copy signed?" she asked. The woman shook her head. "No, ma'am. I came to listen, not to be seen." Lakshmi smiled. "That was me once. Now look where I am." They sat on a nearby bench. The woman introduced herself as Nirmala, a widow who worked at a small printing shop and raised 2 children on her own. She had walked 4 kilometers just to be there. Lakshmi listened to her story without interrupting. Then she said something she rarely said. "May I write about you in my next book?" Nirmala looked shocked. "Me? But who am I?" Lakshmi touched her hand and replied, "You are the reason I write." That night, back in her hotel room, Lakshmi opened her notebook again. The city lights outside the window blinked like stars, but inside the room, her pen moved like a river dot. She wrote about Rahul's eyes. She wrote about Nirmala's quiet strength. She wrote about the girl who cleaned floors, but dreamed of college. She wrote about the woman who gave her husband her last pair of slippers during a flood. And slowly, she realized this story would never truly end. The next morning, she woke up to news that the first print run of her book had sold out, not because of marketing, but because people saw themselves in her words. The book was already being translated into 5 Indian languages. Calls came in from international forums. A message came from a woman in Africa who said, "I don't know where India is on a map, but I know Lakshmi lives in my heart." But even then, Lakshmi's routine didn't change. She still made tea on the gas stove. She still opened her prayer book every morning, and she still replied to every handwritten letter herself. Then one day, something happened that touched her deeply. She received an envelope, sealed with care. Inside was a drawing of her standing on stage, hand in hand with a line of women behind her: teachers, nurses, vegetable sellers, old women with canes, young girls in school uniforms. And at the bottom, written in neat blue ink, were the words, "Thank you for seeing us." Lakshmi stared at the drawing for a long time. She placed it gently inside her notebook and added just one line below it. The day was calm. No fanfare, no flashing lights. Birds sang softly outside Lakshmi Pichai's small Chennai home, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the window. It had been nearly 1 year since the moment she stood on stage and spoke the words that changed thousands of lives. Since then, her story had traveled far beyond her doorstep, but Lakshmi remained the same. That morning, she placed 2 steel tumblers on the kitchen counter, one for herself, one for Sundar. He had come home for a few days, needing peace, needing Uma's cooking, and perhaps needing to sit in the silence she had mastered long ago. "Uma," Sundar said as he sat at the table, "did you hear what happened last night?" Lakshmi shook her head gently. "I was reading letters until late." "What happened?" He turned his tablet around. A global news site showed a photo of her book being held up at a World Summit on Education in Geneva. One of the speakers, a young African leader, had quoted her words, "Start by listening, because those who listen deeply speak truthfully." Lakshmi blinked slowly. "The world listens so fast now," she said, "but I hope it also remembers." Sundar smiled. "They do, Uma. They really do." That week, Lakshmi received another letter, but this one was not like the others. It came from the office of the President of India. She was being awarded the Padma Shri for her contribution to education, literature, and social upliftment. Her first reaction was silence. Her second was to fold her hands and say a short prayer. Then she whispered, "It does not belong to me." Alone, the day of the award ceremony arrived. Lakshmi wore the same silk sari from the book launch. She didn't buy a new one. "This sari has already seen greatness," she joked, when she entered Rashtrapati Bhavan. Even the guards gave her a small nod of respect, not because of her title, but because of what she stood for. As she walked to receive the medal, People stood, but Lakshmi did not walk like someone being honored. She walked like someone carrying the strength of every mother, teacher, daughter, and forgotten soul with her. After receiving the award, she did not give a grand speech. Just a few lines. Thank you for seeing value in silence, and for reminding us that even quiet hands can leave strong marks. A few days later, her second book was released. It was not about her life. It was a collection of real stories from women across the country. She had listened to them, written them down, and placed their names proudly beside their truths. She called it, "We Were Always Here." The launch was held not in a hotel or a hall but in the village where her mother once lived. Under a banyan tree, with school children sitting on the ground, teachers standing in the back, and an old woman who had walked 5 kilometers just to touch Lakshmi's feet. During the event, an unexpected moment happened. A young girl stood up and read a poem from the new book. Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. I was born where no one heard my cry, but now I speak because I saw Amma fly, not with wings, not with noise, but with grace and a mother's voice. Lakshmi's eyes filled with tears. She walked to the girl, embraced her, and whispered, "Never forget who you are." But perhaps the most powerful moment came quietly. Weeks later, a group of young boys from a rural town built a small library. They named it Uma's Corner. They painted a picture of Lakshmi holding a book with one hand and lighting a lamp with the other. They wrote just one sentence on the wall: "Kindness built this room." When Lakshmi saw a photo of it, she placed her hand gently over the image and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. Years passed. Lakshmi stopped attending public events. Her body slowed, but her mind stayed bright. She still answered letters, still welcomed young girls into her home for tea and stories, and still lit a small lamp every evening for her mother's photo. One morning Sundar found her sitting in the veranda, her notebook open, her pen resting on the page. She had written her final line: "The spotlight was never mine. I only held it long enough to pass it to those who needed it more." Sundar sat beside her and held her hand. "You changed the world, Uma." She smiled. "No, I just reminded it to look again." Years had passed since Lakshmi Pichai first stepped onto that stage. The world had changed, and yet, in many quiet corners, her voice still echoed. Not in stadiums or headlines, but in the hearts of people who had once felt unseen. The small house in Chennai had become a place of quiet pilgrimage. Women came with folded hands, children came with poems, and young men brought letters written by their mothers. Lakshmi welcomed them all with the same warm smile and a cup of tea. She no longer traveled. Her knees ached more than before, and she needed help climbing the stairs. But her eyes still shone with purpose, and her heart remained full of stories. Every morning, she sat by the window where sunlight painted the floor in golden stripes. Her notebook, now filled from start to end, sat on her lap. She had written not just her story, but the stories of others, those who never made the news, but who made the world stronger. One morning, as birds chirped outside, Sundar walked in and sat beside her quietly. "Amma," he said, "I think it's time we share your final writings. The people are still waiting." Lakshmi turned her head gently. "What more is there to say? Your words helped a generation stand up. Your silence gave others the courage to speak." She smiled and said, "Then let my silence speak now too." That evening, Sundar made an announcement. Lakshmi's final writings, a small collection of short stories, essays, and letters, would be published under the title, "The Light We Leave Behind." There would be no book launch, no press release, only one request, that every copy be donated to school libraries and community centers. Lakshmi's health began to slow soon after. She spent her days in peace, watching the flowers bloom, listening to radio bhajans, and replying to a few letters when her hands allowed it. She never spoke of her awards, never kept them on display. Instead, she asked that they be used to fund scholarships. Then, one evening, As the sky turned orange and pink, Lakshmi quietly passed away in her sleep. Her hands rested gently on her chest, and her notebook was by her side, just as it had always been. News of her passing spread quickly, but it wasn't the usual kind of news. People didn't share photos of her with medals. They shared their stories of how her words helped them keep going when life was hard, how her silence gave them the strength to listen, how her one speech reminded them that kindness still mattered. In villages and cities across India, candlelight vigils were held. In classrooms, teachers read from her book instead of textbooks. In one school in Ladakh, a girl whispered, "I want to be like Uma." Prime Minister Modi gave a heartfelt tribute. He said, "Lakshmi Pichai did not change India by shouting. She changed it by believing." And her belief lit a fire that will never go out. On her birthday, a statue was placed near her childhood college in Madurai. It was not large. It showed her seated, writing in her notebook, with a small lamp beside her and a child listening at her feet. The plaque below read, "She was never looking for greatness. She only looked for goodness, and the world found her anyway." But the most beautiful tribute came quietly. Many years later, a young woman named Kavya, whose mother had once met Lakshmi at the book launch, became the head of a new national literacy program. On her first day in office, Kavya held up Lakshmi's notebook and said, "I am not here because I was the loudest voice. I am here because someone once reminded me that even silent hearts can lead." And as she spoke, thousands of children across the country opened their books that had Lakshmi's words on the first page. Words that simply said, "Never stop being kind."